Since we are implementing the tax data source, we need to override some of its method. Let's get to look at the tax data source. We have it as an interface where you have an inner interface called load tax callback. You have another for get tax callback with different methods. We have the get tax, the save tax, the complete tax, activate tax, clear completed tax, refresh tax, delete all tax, and delete a particular tax based on its string ID. Now we have to override some of its method. So that's why we need to override the get tax, which is actually going to fire if the database doesn't exist or the table is empty. We also have another method we need to override, the get tax this time, but going to pass different attributes. We are passing the tax ID, the get tax callback. This is going to be fired if the tax isn't found. You're going to override another method called save tax to actually save the tax down, where you have the runnable to insert the tax to the database. And on complete tax, once the complete tax button, or let's say the checkbox is being toggled, it's actually going to update that particular tax and set as completed. You have that overriding as well. This is another complete tax which you need to override, but this time is with the tax with an ID. The other one is with the model, the tax itself as an object. We have the activate tax, which you need to override, all coming from the tax data source interface. And this is where you need to activate the tax. Probably if it's not checked, it's going to be activated. So you have that set up as well. And on clear completed tax, where you're going to actually empty the completed ones, the completed tax. So you trigger the delete completed tax. You need to override that as well. Delete all tax, that's when you trigger the delete tax. And delete tax with an ID, so it's specified you're trying to delete a specific tax, so based on its ID. So you have that set up in the tax local data source, which will actually send the data source as well. And let's get to look at the tax repository, which implement the tax data source. And once you implement that, you override some of its method, which you also have the get tax, the save tax, the complete tax, activate tax, clear completed tax, delete, and so on. I'd like you to go through them in your spare time. Let's get to look at the model. The model, which we're actually looking at, we have in the title, we have in the description, we have in an ID. So we have it right there. So this model serves as like a contract when we are declaring the columns. You should know that. If you notice, we are having some attributes attached to that. The immutable model class for a tax. We have the ID as the primary key, not null, and the column info. Look at the column info. We are trying to give it an entry ID. The same thing goes to the string for the title. Now the column info is title. It's not null. And we have for the description, the last column we'll be talking about is completed, either completed or not. If it's not completed, it's going to be active. So you're going to use a constructor to create a new active tax, which you have right there, and you're going to pass in the parameter, the title, and its description. So that's actually going to initialize with the random UID created. So you can also use another constructor to create an active tax if the tax already has an ID, so that with the title, the description, and the string ID. So you have that set up. So you could also use another constructor. This is called overloading constructor, where you actually pass different parameters to a particular constructor. They're actually going to run in different formats. So it depends on what you are trying, what you are passing, or the way you call the attributes, the parameters you're passing to that particular constructor or to that particular method. This is actually going to create a new completed tax. It has its parameter as the title, the description, and the completed boolean, either completed or not. So is that true or false? So that's setup. Another constructor, which is for completed tax, if the tax already has an ID. So it's actually going to take the title, the description, the ID, and the boolean completed. So cool. We have the get ID, the get title, the get description is completed, is active, is empty. Also to actually check and it returns its appropriate parameters, and you have that set up in the model. So just like the normal model, we used to have the get and set method. So that serves the data, so we can understand how the data structure is. We're using SQLite database, and we're actually manipulating different functionality when we get, when we set, when we are calling based on different parameters, which I've explained. Now I'll be heading straight to the how to add the first tax into the SQLite database. This extends the app compact. As we all know, we have the fields. The request add tax should load data from the repo. That's the key. And the presenter, which we have an object of the add edit tax presenter. We'll get to look at that. And the action bar, which is for the toolbar. So we have it right there where we set the home as up enabled and initialize the toolbar and so on. So cool. After that, right there in the onCreate method, you need to get the support fragment, since you're going to replace the content frame, which is the frame layout we created in the layout, with a fragment. This fragment is going to be the add edit tax fragment, which you have right there. And you have the tax ID. How are you going to get this tax ID? You get the intent that triggered this activity, and get the string extra, where you're going to pass the argument, the edit tax, which you have right there as the parameter, and you actually set that up. So with this chunk, you're going to replace the fragment, and also check if it has some extra, which is the argument edit tax ID, which you're actually going to add up to be able to know the specific tax which you're trying to pull out. So you have that set up. Now, to prevent the presenter from loading data from the repository, if this is a config change, so you have to check for save instance state if it's not null. So if it's not equals to null, the data might not have loaded when the config change happened. So we have to save the state based because of screen orientation. So you save the state. So once it's been changed, or once the activity or the activity is restarted, it's actually going to maintain the state. Now look at the way we create the presenter. When we have the object of the presenter, you instantiate with its class, and you need to pass in some ID. While we need the tax ID, you will be injecting the provide tax repository by calling the context. You add the edit tax fragment, and you load the data from the repo. Can you see? That's the data source you are loading from the repo. You are triggering, or you're starting up the presenter from the activity. So very important. You set the toolbar title and so on. So let's get to look at the presenter before we get to look at the fragments. The presenter implements the contract, which we have the contract presenter and the tax data source, and not just only the tax data source. We have inner interface in the tax data source. It's actually implementing the get tax callback. So it's actually going to override those methods in those interfaces. The tax contract presenter, that's let's get to look at that. The tax contract presenter over here, the presenter. So it's actually going to override the save tax, the populate tax, and is data missing. So those are the methods that will be used: save tax, populate tax, and is data missing. Let's get back to the presenter. So if you're seeing those methods used there, so you don't get scared of it. Now the tax data source. Let's get to look at the get tax callback over here. Tax data source, get tax callback over here. So it's actually going to override the on tax loaded and on data not available. So that's what the methods that we're actually going to be using right there. Now we have for the tax repository, calling the tax data source, that's an object, and the add tax view for the tax contract, that's the view now, not the presenter. We have the tax ID and its tax is data missing. Can you see you've started seeing the methods trying to raise up its head up. Now we create the presenter for the add edit view. We have the tax ID, the tax repository, the add tax view, and should load data from the repo. The tax ID is the edit or null for a new tax, while the tax repository is a repository of data from tax. The add tax view, the add and edit view, they should load data from repo, whether data needs to be loaded or not. So we have the constructor right there, which pass those parameters as I've said and initialize them as needed. And on start, text if the data is not missing, populate the tax. You save the tax. Can you see we've tried to see those parameters where we have the title and description, and if it's a new tax, it creates the tax and pass those attributes, and if not, it updates. So these are just helper methods that we all know when we are creating Android application as we used to. But this is an MVP format where we have them singled out. Methods are singled out, so they are only called when needed. So you don't embed them all in one view. That's just the difference between the MVP and the way you've all been developing or coding Android application. So to create tax now, you could trigger that. You could call the save tax from anywhere and just implement the attributes needed, and it's going to work. It's going to run. So that's just the difference. Now you populate the tax. The same thing happens. You test if it's a new tax. If not, you get the tax and you pass the tax ID with the context as a parameter. It triggers, and this is calling from the tax repository, which is actually the data source. Cool. So it's from somewhere. It's not just an empty method running all around. On tax loaded, the same thing happens. On data not available, that's the view may not be able to handle the UI updates anymore. So you have to handle that as well. Is data missing? Return it. Is a new tax? You return the tax ID to not be null. Now you create a tax. This is where you create a tax where you pass the title and the description. That's just the only thing you need to create that same tax. When you have the edit text of the title and you have the edit text to actually extract the description, and you create the new tax. Cool. And you update the tax based on the title and description, and you save that and you show the tax list. After an edit, you go back to the list. You have that set up all in the presenter. Now we've understand the contract as well, where we have the two interfaces, the base view, that's for the view, which the fragment will be using, since the fragment deals with the view, and the presenter is using the presenter interface from the add edit tax contract. So we have that set. Let's look at the fragment. You see the fragment is actually going to implement the view. Can you see? Extends fragment and it implements the add edit tax contract view instead of the presenter. The presenter implements the presenter while the fragment implements the view. Cool. Since you want to display content to the layout. Now this is the main UI for the add tax screen, where users can enter a tax title and description. Cool. We have the on resume, where the presenter starts up. You need to start up the presenter to listen to values that you'll be passed to them, and you set the presenter on activity created, just the same format we have for our presenters. On activity created, on create view, that's the major method which you inflate the layout, and you can actually initialize all fields or all layout fields used in the layout, which you have for the title and the description. And now they are going to show the empty tax error. That's if to-dos cannot be empty. That's the snack bar. That's also another method you override, which you inherit from the implementation. You have the show tax list. This is actually going to get the activity, set the result if it's okay, and finishes up. You set the title. That's the title for the toolbar. You set the description, and set the title rather, which is the title field, and the description. And if it's active, it's also. So now if you should notice, the title, set the title to the set text to the title. The same thing goes for the description. You set the text to the description. You have that for the fragment, and that ends up the added tax model. Now let's get to look at the tax itself. Once you've added a tax, you could have the ability to view the list of tax you've added to the SQLite database. So I will actually be starting from the scroll, child, swipe, refresh layout, because that's what that's like the custom view that was used in the layout. This is actually going to support non-direct descendant scrolling views. This works as expected when the scroll view is a direct child. It triggers the refresh only when the view is on top, and this class adds a way to define which view controls this behavior. It extends the swipe refresh layout where you need to override the on child scroll up. So you're trying to scroll up now, you need to know the scroll position. Well, you pass in to know if the scroll up child is not null. You pass in direction -1, and you can child scroll up. You have that set up. Now let's get to have the tax activity. This extends the app compact activity, we all know, and we have the onCreate where we have the tax acts, that's the layout, and set up the toolbars. We set up the navigation drawer layout, and now we're going to replace fragments. Well, we're going to set up the tax fragment over here, and initialize the presenter. We create a presenter, which is the tax presenter, and you could also load previously saved states. That's the save instance state if there is a previous state of the view. Cool. That's when you use the out state. You put serializable, the key and the value. The tax presenter is since you've started up the presenter, it could listen for data. You get the filtering. We'll get to look at that in the method. Now the navigation drawer, I won't be covering all that. We should know how to set up a navigation drawer, which we have right there set up. I'll be headed straight to the tax presenter. Let's get to look at what we're presenting, what data we're presenting. This listens to user actions from the UI. It's going to retrieve the data and update the UI as required. That's what this presenter is going to do. We are going to implement the tax contract. This time, the interface presenter, not the view. The view will be done by the fragments. I think we should start to understand how this is being laid out. Now we have some fields to actually look at: the tax repository, the tax view, the mcorrect filtering, and the first load. Those are the values we'll be looking at. And we also have the constructor that initialize the repository, the tax views, and you set the presenter to the context. Cool. Now we're going to override some of the methods from the contract. Let's get to look at the contract presenter. We have for the view, which will be used from in the fragment. Now for the presenter, we're going to override the results, the load tax, add new tax, open tax details, complete tax, activate tax, clear completed tax, salt filtering, which was used in the activity, salt filtering, as we've seen. So let's get to look at all those methods, how we're going to manipulate them. Excuse me. We have the results now. Now, if a tax was successfully added, it's going to show a snack bar. So we have that looked up. Now, if the edit text request add tax is equals to request code, that's okay. It's actually going to show a successful saved message, which is calling the mtax view. That's the view now. It's pointing at the view to actually undo that and do that. And we are going to load tax. Simplification for sample, a network reload will be forced on first load to actually load the tax. Now you're going to pass through to refresh the data, and you're going to pass through to display a loading icon in the UI, which you have to trigger in the load tax, where you pass in the boolean false update, either true or false. Another one, show loading UI, either true or false. So if you're showing the loading UI, you set the loading indicator to true. And if you're forcing the update, you set the tax repository to refresh the tax, which is the tax repository, to refresh and to get that started. So at that point in time, the network request might be handled in a different thread. So we're actually using Espresso to do the test to actually know if the app is busy until the response is handled or not. Now, this is where the network request can start up. Probably if you're connecting to to web services, or you're using some network library like Retrofit to actually pull data. So you could actually do that in this chunk. So we have this. since we are not actually using any network, we are just calling from the SQLite database. That's why we have the tags as the list. I have a list of tags, which is called the tags to show. Now we are fetching data from the SQLite database. That's just it. This callback may be called twice, once for the catch and once for the loading the data from the server API, as I've said earlier. So we check when to check before decrementing, otherwise it shows counter has been corrupted exception. That's for the espresso at the lane resource. Now for the filter, since we have tags sitting in the SQLite database. Now for the first case, all tags, the second case for active tags, the third case for completed tags. Since we have different parameters for that, so we're going to call the corresponding method to actually fetch those values for us. Now the view may not be able to handle UI updates anymore, which is active and so on data not available. So we have, so if you should notice, adding to the star is adding to the list, the util list, which you have here. Okay, cool. I think we understand what we are doing. And on data not available, if data is not available, the view, so it's actually going to show a loading tags error, point blank. Now let's process tags. If the tags is empty, it's going to show a message indicating there are no tags for that folder. Else, it's going to show the list of tags, which triggers the show folder label, the tags, completed tags. Since we are going to use a folder, if you notice, we have that at the toolbar where we're going to actually toggle between the all, active, and completed. And we have the add new tags method overriding, the open tags details, where we show the tags details UI, the complete tags, you call the repository, trigger the complete tags, you pass the completed tags parameter, that's from the tags object. And the same thing goes for the show tags marked completed, to show the ones that were marked completed. So you're actually going to force the UI to show that by loading the tags down to the UI. Cool. The same thing goes for activate tags, clear completed tags, and now let's look at the set filtering. You're going to set the current tags filtering type, which is the all tags, the completed tags, and the active tags. So you have to filter to actually select which particular tags are you looking at. Is it completed? Is it all? Is it? So you will actually see that in the toolbar. It's just like the sorting, which we're known for, where we will actually going to fetch the data from the SQLite database. We'll use the sorting order to actually return another cursor. From there, we're going to use the adapter, the cursor adapter, to decompile or to dig deeper, where you're going to move to first, and you now start to extract the values from the cursor. Can you see all that long processes can just be done with few lines of code, which you have right there in the tags presenter. Cool. From there, we'll look at the fragment. Let's get to look at the fragment. The fragment that's going to display the tags itself. This is going to display a grid of tags. Users can choose to view all, active, or completed. Now we have implementing the tags contract, the view this time. So it's actually going to implement a lot of methods. We have the fields that we'll be looking at, the adapter to actually display data, where we'll be binding data to, the image view, text view, which will be used, the linear layout, and even the M filtering label view. That's for the text view, as we all see. In the occurrence method, we initialize the list adapter. On resume, start the presenter. You start the presenter. Let's get to look at the on create view. In the on create view, you set the layout tags fragments. This is where you call the list view. You initialize all views that you actually set up. And now in the no tags add view, we'll set on click listener to that. We show the add tags. Now the floating action button is still there, where we set on click listener to that to as well to add a new tags to the presenter. Can you see that? Cool. Now we have the swipe refresh. When you drop down, what's going to happen is going to load the tags from the presenter. So can you see the presenter keeps doing all the work there, and that's the real view that we should even this is where we should start to understand how it works. because it's from the view. This is what we see, and that's where we should know how the whole structure works. So the presenter is right knitted with the fragments. And on options item selected, can you see for the menu filter, it calls on the show filter pop-up menu. For the menu clear, it's going to call the presenter to trigger the clear completed task method. And for the refresh, it's going to load the task just like the refresh that was used in the swipe refresh layouts. It's because you're actually fetching locally. If you are fetching from the network, you see a lot of activity going on when you're trying to refresh data. Now the show filtering pop-up menu, which will be triggered to actually sort. Now it's going to test for different case instances. For active, completed. For active, set the filtering and the type to active tags. For completed, it sets it to completed tags. And for the default will be all tags. So we have three of them: all tags, completed, and active. Can you see the set filtering, which you have in the presenter? That's the presenter object, presenter, that keeps the presenter. We have it cool. That keeps over here. That helps us to actually do all that from the presenter, which is actually going to go directly to the data source. I think you should understand where it's all coming from. It's not a magic. Now you have the set load indicator, show tags for the list adapter, set the visibility and to be visible, and for the tags view to be gone. So to actually show all tags, then you replace the data. It's just like swap cursor, as we all know. Swap cursor, just replace data and to the list adapter based on the new value from the tags list, which we actually populated right there when I was talking about the APIs, which was populated from the SQLite database. Cool. We have for show no tags, we have to show no completed tags. So it's your responsibility to know which interface method you will be needing. It's not actually going to be there from heaven, or it's not going to actually get itself there. It's your responsibility to know which methods you'll be needing to actually work with. So you add that to all interfaces, so you get to use them in the course of your application. I won't be going through all, but let me point out the tax adapter. It's an inner class inside just extended base adapter where we get to bind data. Now we have the replace data, just like the swap cursors we all know, which set the notified data set change, and you have the data, and from there you have the get view. Since we are using a list view, that's why you have it this way. If you are using a recycler view, it's going to be quite different with view order, with bind view order, and so on. So you bind data to its appropriate view. Cool. That's where we're actually going to be stopping at this point in time. We have for the detail and statistics. I will employ you to check that in your spare time. The major aspect is how to interact with the presenter. The presenter actually going to fetch those interfaces for you, just like what we have here, and it's sometimes it points down to the data source or to the repository, the tax repository, where the value is coming from. As you can see, the tax repository takes cognizance of all this, and you have that fetching data for you. The tax repository, you can see, it's the major core or the major functionality of the presenter is to fetch data from the repository, from anywhere the data sources. So that's just what the presenter does. We have the contract that has all the methods declared, all the interfaces which you must override anytime you're implementing the contract. So we have multiple two presenters or two interfaces, one for the presenter and the other for the view. So the presenter uses the one for its presenter to actually present those values, while the view, which is the fragment, use for the base view, which actually extends the base view presenter, as you see. So that's just how the structure flows, where you will be able to separate logics from the view. The view is so independent. So once you are trying to probably now we are using SQLite database, or we are fetching data from the SQLite database, you want to fetch data from the internet or from the cloud service. You don't need to start to bother yourself on how the view is going to be. The view is still going to stay. The only thing you look at is probably the data source, and probably some helper methods or some interfaces that you need to add up to what you need. That's just the tweak you need to do. The whole structure, the fragment, the views, and even the presenters, most of the implementations will still stand. You just need to do little tweak from the data source. That's all. So you just don't. It's actually extensible. It's scalable to any robust application. That's the right path if you're trying to create a production robust ready application. Try to emulate and start to use MVP in Android development. I would like you to leave any comments whatsoever in the comment section. I'll be there to answer virtually all your queries, so that you have a smooth running experience when you're dealing with MVP in Android. In the manifest, as we all know, the metadata, we have the tax activity, the tax detail activity, the added tax activity, and the statistics activity. So those are the activity that we use. You don't add fragments to your manifest. You only add the activity that we used, because activity actually is the host, while the fragment is actually like a sucker to the activity. So that's just it. Now we implore you to put on your notification, so that you'll be able to actually get notified anytime I'm uploading new videos when it comes to Android development. I'm called out to keep on digging and getting the best possible way to develop Android application. And also subscribe to the channel, and keep watching out for different implementation of Android programming systems, and I'll be there to help you out in any of your Android problems. Thank you guys for hanging out with me throughout this video, and I will say bye bye for now.